to master anything, you need patience. You need to know about the 10,000 hour rule, which is a bit of a cliche now. Everyone sort of talks about it. Nobody really understands or has gone into, very few people have gone into depth about what that means.
When Paul Graham first saw computers, he was fascinated. He was fascinated by what he saw in television, the depiction of what computers could be in the future, and he thought he had to be a part of that. So as a kid, in the 70s, growing up, when most people were not doing a lot with computers, he was learning computer programming. He was a young hacker.
He loved computers. He was a hacker, a real hacker, when he was 17 years old, back in the 70s, when hacking was, there weren't very many of them.
Making things by trial and error, just putting in the work and doing it again and again and again until he got it. But for him, this was like painting is for some people. It was something that he could do, and he could try something, and he could immediately see the result. He could see what it looked like as soon as he was putting it up, and he could get a feel for it from all of this practice, all of these hours putting in this time. And he kept going with it. After school, he went on to Harvard and did more schooling.
And then so he got into computer sciences, and he thought that was his path. And AI in the late 70s, when AI was not really, nobody knew about it. And then it wasn't quite working. He wasn't happy. It didn't feel right. He hated academia. He hated politics. He hated offices. He was a rebel.
So Paul Graham made his own program. He made his own graduate schooling where he was partnering with the Rhode Island School of Design and studying there. And then he eventually went on to study painting in Italy as well.
He gave it all up. And he decided, I want to be an artist. I want to paint. And he went to Italy, and he went to art school, and he learned to paint, and he really loved that. And then he came back to New York, and he was kind of an artist in his loft in New York. He wasn't making any money, but things were okay.
But after all that, all these hours of the computer programming, of the hacking, of the painting, he came back to the US, and he still wasn't making money, so he was using his computer skills as a consultant to pay the bills, helping people with that, still trying the painting.
And then he heard an ad on the radio in 1995 saying that the internet, the future of the internet is people will be selling things on the internet. And suddenly a light bulb went on in his head. He goes, man, all right, I've had all these skills. I could make a platform that will allow people to buy things on the internet. And I can design it because I've been studying design. In other words, not just computers and AI and all that. I've been studying what's aesthetics and what's pleasing to the eye and the psychology of art and how to design things. So he took all of his experience in hacking, in artificial intelligence, in art, and he created what ended up selling to Yahoo.
He contacted one of his old hacker friends. They started building, and they built a company called ViaWeb. ViaWeb was sold to Yahoo for $45 million. This was the process of a man who was putting in his hours, putting in the 10,000 hours, putting in this time at becoming someone who made things. Because for Paul Graham, he knew that there were certain things he didn't like. He didn't like big institutions. He didn't like politics. He didn't like offices. He didn't like academia. He knew that those things weren't for him, but he kept putting in the hours into what he knew was for him, and that was making things. Whether that was making painted artwork or making a program through hacking and trial and error, he knew that he liked making things.
He didn't know what he was doing. He was lost. He tried different things, and by the time he was 30, he had developed 5 skill sets, literally, that were so solid that it would come together at some point. Something would trigger that moment. Hearing something on the radio, it may not have been that. It may not have been Netscape. It may have been something else. But it's like a soil that was so fertile with skills. Something great was about to happen, and that's a path I think is really rich to imitate.
But this didn't stop him. That wasn't the end. He didn't just make his millions and retire because he's a true master. He kept pushing himself. One day, Paul Graham was speaking to students at Harvard, and they were asking him all these questions about tech entrepreneurship. How can they build up as a tech entrepreneur? How can they make changes? and he decided to make yet another product. He made a company that would be the apprenticeship for tech entrepreneurs, a place that would nurture young tech companies and build them up. He called it Y Combinator. Now, Y Combinator has many, many businesses under it, businesses that you've heard of, businesses like Airbnb and Dropbox. Paul Graham is now a true master. He is featured in Mastery by Robert Greene. And his company, Y Combinator, when Mastery was written, was said to be valued at over $500 million.
Started a company most recently called Y Combinator. I mean, he started it 12 years ago and he sold it, but it's a billion-dollar company in Silicon Valley.
I read an article recently that dated back to 2017 that says that their portfolio overall of all those companies, the Airbnb and Dropbox and all that, valued at over $80 billion. And that is because Paul Graham did not stop with formal education, did not just do the minimum, going and going through trial and error. He kept pushing, he kept trying new things, finding the places that were right for him, putting in his 10,000 hours.
It's a great study that pretty much demonstrated that after 10,000 hours of repetition in practicing a particular skill set, something literally happens to the human brain. A transformation occurs.
Still trying and working hard and making new things even after all of his schooling was done. And that is how he completed the ideal apprenticeship. And that is how Paul Graham became a master.
After studying great chess players and musicians, it was determined that reaching that 10,000 hour mark was something magical. Now it could be 9,500 hours, it could be 10,000. It depends, there's a little leeway, but it's great science. So to answer your question, you have to be willing to go through that process and go through those hours.
Mastery is not something that is set out just for people who are born geniuses. It's not something that requires people to be made a certain way right off the bat. It's for people who are willing to put in the work. Mastery is for people who are willing to put in that 10,000 hours.
Every field is different. Some fields require several skills. You're not just learning chess, you're learning business and you're learning the certain technical aspects and etc. You're combining skills. So that might require a little bit more than 10,000 hours.
So maybe you're someone who's done your formal education and you think, oh, now I could let off the brakes, now I could stop. No, now is the time to continue your education, to keep building into yourself, to keep investing in yourself, to keep working on making those skills even after. That's when the apprenticeship starts, when the formal education is over. That's when you build. That's when you make your skills as an apprentice, and that's how you become a master.